Hi. I'm also a digital yeti. What I mean by that, there's a buzzword which has been around for a while, the digital native, which is somebody who's born in the age of technology, who has always had access to the internet, to mobile phone technology, and so on. I was born in 1972, which means that I was 18 effectively before email and so on became commonplace. I grew up in a pre-digital world, I mean, not completely, but in terms of consumer society. And I grew up with telephones in the house with dials on them which went round. But at the same time, I also grew up in a house which had access to very, very early computers. We were lent dedicated word processors by IBM. Those of you who used those things will remember 8-inch square floppy disks. Many people don't remember floppy disks, let alone the 8-inch ones. And I learned to type very young. I used the command line interface to load word processing software. Command line interface, a strip of text with a flashing cursor prompt. You entered a command, you had to get it right, otherwise you saw the word syntax error and nothing happened. I typed schoolwork, and then I had to copy it out longhand because schools at the time would not accept typed work from students, because obviously handwriting was going to be more important in the future in daily life than typing was. So when I say I'm a digital yeti, what I mean is that I am the missing link between those of you who are not digital at all in terms of how you grew up and those of you who assume global connectivity wherever you go. As a matter of interest, I know we have two Luddites over here. I didn't see who they were. Do we have anybody who considers themselves to be massively connected, who tweets a lot? Is anybody tweeting right now? 1, 2, yeah, okay. Oh, we've got, yeah, okay, you're slightly in the minority, Luddites, but you're doing fine. So while all that was going on, well, let's go back a little bit. The 20th century was obviously a time of considerable change in societal terms. The impact of 2 world wars and a number of other things, some of them technological. The arrival of labour-saving devices in the home, the washing machine, liberated a lot of people, women, into the workforce, into education and so on. Women's suffrage in the UK was somewhat in 1918 and somewhat again in 1928. These things changed the face of how we identified ourselves socially, how we located ourselves in what we now think of as a social network, but obviously not a digital one. At the same time, things like the family, church and state, the nation state, and so on became less solid, less fixed. Location. You no longer grew up and lived within a 5-mile radius of where you were born. You could move around a great deal. There was a continuing shift from rural society to urban society. In a sense, there was a danger of us becoming atomized. And I think it's interesting and not entirely coincidental that around about the end of the 20th century, around about the same time that Margaret Thatcher was saying there's no such thing as society, there's only men and women and families, we were also developing mobile and digital communications technology which would knit us back together. I don't suggest to you that there's a teleology going on there, that it's deterministic, but I think it's significant, and I'll come back to this in a second, that from the science that we possessed, which allowed the creation of communications technology, or rather technology which networked computers together and created the telephone, we created not just broadcast television and cable TV, which go one way, they go from a central hub outwards, but a technology which allows us to communicate multilaterally with one another. We knitted ourselves back together. In danger of atomization, we chose not to be atomized. Many of the things that people worry about when they worry about digital technology, and we're not going to talk too much about moral panic this evening, but obviously there's a great deal of it kicking around. Many of the things people worry about are aspects of, I think, late liberal democratic capitalism rather than digital technology. When your boss calls you in the evening time when you want to be with your family and the phone rings, that's not the fault of a mobile telephone or even a mobile telephone company. That's the working culture that we have. I mentioned this yesterday in Bristol at the Festival of Ideas, and a guy in the front row stuck his hand up and told me that Bain had instituted a rule that your boss can't call you after a certain time in the evening because that's family time. Bain have decided that it is psychologically unhelpful and unproductive for their workforce to be interrupted. So he said, anyway, if anyone knows that's not true, please say it now. But I was fascinated by that because I thought that was a really interesting acknowledgement from a multinational. While I was growing up, I started out with the command line interface. Then in the 1980s, something happened. The graphic user interface was created. William Gibson wrote Neuromancer, and the movie Tron came out. Who remembers Tron the first time round? Yeah. Oh, there's like 2 people who are prepared to admit this. You're almost all old enough. Right. Not really. Yeah, so Tron and Neuromancer and the graphic user interface between them created the idea of the space behind the screen. A non-physical space, almost a pirate nation, and that word at the time didn't have the connotation of digital piracy that it does now, but a pirate nation circling the world's oceans or in a kind of non-physical other space, answerable to the laws of no country. And courts were a little bit unwilling to take jurisdiction over the internet when it first began to happen. That space behind the screen idea stayed with us for quite a long time, and then recently it began to dissolve, which I'll come back to a little bit later, but for a long time it was cyberspace, another place. Now, National Security Agency in the States, security companies and so on, are the people who use the term cyberspace. Almost no one does, apart from that, because it feels old and it feels hackneyed. The Times had me write a piece about nostalgia the other day, looking back on these kind of halcyon days of the internet. In 2010, something else happened which changed the face of things again. Steve Jobs and Apple created the iPad, and they brought it out, and here for the first time you had a new illusion, a new presentation of data. You could touch it, physically touch it, and people were very surprised by that, very blown away by it. And around the same time, you began to see people thinking about the internet and the digital realm in a different way. No longer comfortable with talking about it as the digital world, but rather seeing it as an overlay over the world that we have. And this comes back to Alex's point, there is no digital world. It's simply a reflection. It's a mirror. While all this was going on, we perhaps formed a new relationship with text. Text and humanity have a symbiotic relationship. Anyway, we're very bound up with one another. Reading is not a skill that we're born with. We have to learn it. We have to acquire it. And there's a story that when when Socrates was quizzed about it, he wasn't happy with mass literacy as a concept at all. He thought people would cease to remember things, stop thinking for themselves, that they would just go and read something, write it down. No one would formulate opinions anymore. They would just read things. Obviously, that has an echo today when we're being told that deep reading is disappearing, that literacy is changing, and that people reading documents on the internet no longer read properly. They read in a fragmented, dissociated way, disconnected. They break off from the text all the time, and it damages their concentration. I would challenge that. I would say that what's happening is a slightly different thing, a new way of reading, a new way almost of being, because reading and literacy are associated in some ways with the development of what we think of as the individual mind, which is synthetic. Instead of taking authority from one text and accepting the truth of what you're reading, you look around to a number of streams and you pick out evidence, narratives, and so on, and weave your own. You don't accept the centralized authority of news. You look for different sources to try and work out as close as you can get to the truth, because we begin to understand that the truth as presented by one source, by one person, by one newspaper, can be fatally flawed, and it can mislead us. That's a Gutenberg moment. Gutenberg was about the distribution of the authority of information away from the church towards anybody who had access to a printing press. Gutenberg is an overused metaphor right now, but the thing that really is extraordinary is that dissemination of the authority of information. And I find myself asking, I wonder what changes will occur, if the changes that are caused by a shift in how we deal with text are in some senses profound, because they are, I think, visible to a very small degree in the architecture of the brain. In other senses, less so. But what changes will take place in us and in the society we make if we're synthetic and creative about how we tell ourselves the truth, rather than simply accepting authority from one place? It could be a very interesting society. And I'm going to ask a neuroscientist. I've got a guy I want to talk to about it, so I'll tell you next time. The last thing I will say, we're unprepared. We're unprepared because we don't discuss technology in popular culture. There is a rift between science and technology and the arts, which we must repair. C.P. Snow talked about it in The Two Cultures. He suggested that the literary elite was trying to sideline science, and Leavis got very upset with him. They had a big set to. They got really, really cutting with one another. And we inherit that dispute. And it leads us to a situation where, who's read Cold Comfort Farm? Who knows it's a science fiction novel? Nobody's got their hand up. Video Phones, an alternative universe in which Britain went to war in South America. It's a story, it's a future story when it was written. It's a story about an alternative possibility. I think there are hovering cars as well, I can't remember. But everybody forgets that, because now we don't write about technology. We don't discuss it in that way in the theatre. It's not part of the popular discourse. Science is something that's quite awkward for politicians. They don't like it either, so we're unprepared. I came to that realization, actually it was handed to me on a plate. I was in the States, there was an ad for the Discovery Channel. A very, very old man in black and white on the screen describes his family, his many grandchildren, his many, many great-grandchildren, his many, 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 many great-great-grandchildren. And then he says, I want you to meet someone, but you'll have to be very quiet. My mother's quite shy. And then underneath it said, when this happens, you'll want to know why. And it's true, we will, and we won't know why because we haven't talked about it.